In this video, let's create the shooting script. And we should already have temporary pooling class and the bullet prefabs up to this point. So now inside the weapons folder, let's create a new C# script. And we can rename it to auto shoot. And then let's open the script. And in this script, instead of using the update method to loop a code, we are going to use a coroutine. A coroutine is a special method that returns IEnumerator types, which can pause execution and return control to Unity, but then continue where it left off on the following frame. A coroutine can also loop its code with a specific interval, whether to loop it every frame or loop it every certain second. This makes coroutine quite useful in game development. I'm going to show you how to create and use coroutine. Let's create a new method with a return type of IEnumerator, and let's call it shooting sequence. Inside this coroutine, I'm going to create a while statement with a true keyword as its condition. Inside the while statement, let us just print shooting as a message. This will print the message into the console. And for every coroutine, we need to tell the flow of the execution by using a yield return keyword. And in this example, let's just type yield return null. This will loop the while blocks every frame. Let's save the script, go back to Unity, and I'm going to attach the script to the player. Now open the console window so we can examine the messages. And let us test this. And it seems I've forgotten to run the coroutine. So let us go to the script again. And we need to call this coroutine inside a built-in method. So let us run it in the start method. And to run a coroutine, we need to call it using a method called start coroutine and pass the coroutine as an argument. Save the script again and let us test this again. And now the shooting message gets printed every frame. Now let's go back to the script. Say we want to loop the code every 2 seconds. Then we can instantiate a new class by typing a new wait for seconds after the yield return statement and pass 2 as the wait for seconds value. Save and let us go back to Unity. I'm going to clear the console and let's test this again. And now the shooting message gets printed every 2 seconds. So you can see how useful coroutine is. I'm going to set this back to null. And let us start working on this shooting script. So first, we need to declare a couple of variables. First would be a public game object. For the bullet prefab reference, we can call it bullet prefabs. And the next would be a public with the type of transform, and this is going to be the fire point or the bullet spawn position. We will also need a public variable with a type of shoot profile, and let's just call this shoot profile. This will define the shooting characteristic. And we will also need a couple of private variables. The first one will be the type of float, and we can name it total spread. And we also want to create variables type of wait for seconds called rate and interval. This will be used for the shooting sequence coroutine loop and delay rate. Let's change start to on-enable. And let us also add an on-disable method. This is basically the opposite method of on-enable. It gets called every time the script gets disabled, either from setActive to false or if the object gets destroyed. And inside onDisable, we want to run the stop all coroutines method. And this will stop all of the coroutines running in this class instance, which will stop the shooting sequence. And inside onEnable method, let us initialize the interval value by typing interval equal new wait for seconds, and we can pass a float from the shoot profile, which is called the interval. And for the rate, we want to do the same but we want to pass the shoot profile fire rate instead. And I'm going to also check if the fire point is null. Then we want to set its value to the transform of the script owner. And now let us create the shooting method. And we want to pass a float number for the angle of the bullet spread. And let us delete this print line. Inside the shoot method, I'm going to create for loop, and for the length I'm going to use the shoot profile amount. And I've made a mistake here. This loop code shouldn't be here, but it should be inside the while loop of the shooting sequence coroutine. So let us move it. And inside the shoot method, let's create a local game object variable called temp, so we can hold a reference to the spawned bullet. And then we can use the pooling manager by accessing its static reference, which is called instance, and then use the use object to spawn the bullet prefabs. And use the fire point position and rotation. Next, we want to rotate the spawn bullet using the transform.rotate method, and we want to use the second overload of this method, which requires the intended rotating axis and the angle value. We can pass vector 3.up into the axis, which is going to be the y-axis and the angle argument. And let us call this shoot method inside the coroutine for loop. But before that, let us declare a float called angle before the loop and set its value to 0. And we are going to calculate the angle based on the amount and the spread value from the shoot profile. We need to set the total spread value first. So inside onEnable, let's define it. So total spread will be the value of shoot profile spread multiplied by shoot profile amount. I'm going to create an if statement to check if the amount is greater than 1 and put the for loop inside the if statement block. And then we can calculate the angle. The angle will be the total spread multiplied by the I or loop index value that's been divided by the shoot profile amount. But we need to cast it to a float so we can have a decimal value. And we want to shift the rotation value. I'm going to explain this. So if we have the shooting direction, if the amount is 1, then we can simply shoot it straight up. But if there are more than 1, then we need to rotate it based on its index. For example, the second bullet will be rotated like so, but we need to rotate all of the bullets by half value of the total spread, so the spread distribution is nice and centered. So if we have more bullets, let's say 4, then if we don't shift the rotation, it will look like this. The bullets will only spread slightly to the right. So when shooting, we need to shift the angle to compensate this. Let us decrement the angle value by the value of total spread divided by 2. And then we want to yield return the rate inside the loop. And outside the loop, let's change the yield return null to yield return interval. Back to Unity, now let's set up the auto shoot script on the player. First, we can pass the shooting profile we've created before to the shoot profile slot, and also the bullet prefabs to the prefab slot. And for the fire point, we need to pass a transform, and in the player game object, I've already added an empty child called shoot point and set its position to be in front of the ship. And with the coordinates set to local, make sure that the Z or the forward direction of the shoot point points to the same direction of the Z axis of the world. So let us assign it to the fire point field. In the shoot profile object, we have set the amount to 3. So let us test this. And it doesn't shoot because I forgot to call the shoot method. So let us just add a call to the shoot method and pass the angle value. I'm going to comment on the shifting code temporarily, and let's test this. It seems we have an issue with the pooling manager here. And this should be fire point equal to null. And since we are running the coroutine in the onEnable method, we might have a race condition with the pooling manager initialization here on awake. So to fix this, we can just delay the shooting sequence a bit. We can just copy the yield return rate line and paste it at the beginning of the coroutine. Let's go back to Unity and press play. Now it shoots, but we have a slight delay, causing a weird spread distribution. So let's go back to the script and fix the problem. First, let's add an if statement to check for the yield return rate. And let's set a condition. If the fire rate is greater than 0, then we want to execute the yield return rate. Otherwise, we don't want to execute it, so the loop runs on the same frame. Now let's test this again. And I've forgotten to set the fire rate back to 0. So let's set it back and test this again. And now, as you can see, it fires correctly. But the spread is not centered. The bullet is spreading to the right side. So let's go back to the script and fix this. Now we can uncomment this line, and basically this line will shift the angle value by half of the total spread value. Let's test this again. Now the spread is indeed shifted, but now it is slightly shifted to the left. We need to compensate for this shift by subtracting the value with the spread value from the profile divided with the amount from the shoot profile. Let's go back to Unity and test this again. And now the spread is nicely centered. And if you want to have a faster bullet rate, we can lower the interval value. Let's lower it to 0.1. So we can create a different tiers of weapon with different characteristics by trying different values in the profile. And this is also applicable to the enemy weapon behavior. For example, if we want to create a bullet that is spreading sequentially, we can set the rate to some value. For example, let's set the amount to 10 and fire rate to 0.15 and the interval to 2. And now we have an interesting fire pattern, and we certainly can use this kind of pattern for the enemy. So with only one script, we can create a different pattern for different weapons.